This episode is sponsored by Mia Water. Mia was founded by Robert Gourlay, who I interviewed on this podcast, and I really see Robert as one of the pioneers in the field of water and human health. Water, as we all know, is one of the foundational pillars of life, and yet most of what we drink is full of chemicals, it's stagnant, and it's been stripped of its life-giving energy. Robert created a device which actually structures water and gives it a negative charge, which is truly amazing and vital for human health and the health of the planet. All of that can be measured and tested. These devices are small, they're really well built, and they last a lifetime. They are an investment, but in my opinion, I think one of the most worthwhile investments you can make for your own health and the health of your family. I've been fascinated by water for many years. I followed the work of some of the luminaries in the field, like Gerald Pollack and Viktor Schauberger, and I think Robert has really advanced this field a huge step with the invention of these devices and making this life-giving energy, life-giving water energy, more accessible to all. I use Mia Water devices in my own home, so I'm really happy to recommend them and to have them as a sponsor of this podcast. As listeners of the show, receive 10% off all of their products at miawater.com/universe. That's meawater.com/universe, and use the coupon code universe at checkout. This episode of the podcast is being sponsored by my friends over at Real Mushrooms, realmushrooms.com, my friends Jeff and Sky Chilton. I had Jeff on the podcast. He's a really fascinating guy. I was really happy when they offered to be a sponsor. They sell medicinal mushrooms, things like reishi, chaga, cordyceps, turkey tail. I think many people are now familiar with the amazing medicinal qualities of mushrooms. They sell an amazing product. It's 100% organic. It's the actual mushroom, which is unlike a lot of companies that are either not organic, they don't actually use the mushroom, they can have fillers, they're potentially using the mycelium on grain, and that's in the final product. So really high quality product. It's the only product I use. I think they're just doing amazing work. As listeners of the podcast, you can receive 25% off of your first order if you use the discount code UNIVERSE at checkout, and I think you'll be really, really happy with their products. On this episode of the podcast, I sat down with Robert Gourlay. I came across Robert's work some time ago. I was very fascinated. I have been very fascinated for many, many years on this idea of the life-giving energy of water, especially these ideas of structured water, negatively charged water, water that's full of its life force, its vital energy. And I think Robert is doing amazing work. He's built off, I think, the work of some of the pioneers in the field of water, people like Pollack and Schauberger. And so it was really a pleasure and an honor to have him come on and share in his knowledge, his wisdom. He's been doing this work for many years. We spoke about his background, about his interest in water, how kind of a near-death experience really allowed him to reframe his worldview and to look at things in a bigger picture. The aspect of water is so fundamental to all of us. It's a big part of who we are. We spoke about the origins of water, the consciousness of water, how water has really been polluted and tainted through being pumped through pipes and rivers being straightened, and the chemical pollutants, and how almost all of the water we drink actually has a positive charge to it, which is has adverse effects to our health. And through aspects of magnetization, of negatively charging it, restructuring it, just the really amazing benefits that water can have on so many aspects of our lives. So it was a really big conversation. We spoke about a lot. I really enjoyed this conversation and Robert's knowledge and wisdom, and I think you all will get a lot out of this episode. As always, if you're able to help with the algorithms, that's a really big help. So if you're viewing this on YouTube or Rumble, hitting the subscribe button, turning on the notification bell, liking the video, and if you're listening to this on Apple Podcast or Spotify, leaving a starred rating and a short review. And also, if you're able to support this podcast, Patreon is a really good website. You can sign up for as little as $1 a month. I very much like the idea of websites like that because they're built on this idea of reciprocity. So if you feel like you're gaining wisdom, knowledge, insight from these podcasts, it's a really impactful way to give back. And as always, thank you so much to all of the patrons, the people supporting that way. And if you're able to do that, thank you very much in advance. And then finally, if you're interested in working with myself, my colleague Marav Artsy, you can check out my website at nicotianarustica.org. There'll be a link to that in the show notes, and you can learn all about our upcoming plant medicine retreats, where we also work on a lot of these ideas that we spoke about in this interview. And then also, if you're interested in working with me with integration work, consultation, anything like that, you can also find all of that information on my website as well. So I think that's it for the intro, and without further ado, here is my conversation with Robert.
Running out from the maze, running out of the maze today. Running out from the maze, running out from the maze, running out from the maze today. I'm running out from the maze, running out from the maze, run out of the maze today.
Okay, great. Well, thank you very much, Rob, for coming on. I really appreciate this. I was trying to think how I first heard of you and Mia Water. I think it might have been, and I could be wrong, but it might have been from Dr. Thomas Cohen. I think he might have recommended your products. He's
Yeah, I've
he's
had
a
contact with him over the years, and I've got his books.
Yeah. Yeah, he's a very fascinating guy. He used to be a medical doctor. I mean, he still is. I think he left his license so he could practice more holistic medicine. But he very much he's written a number of books, but he wrote a very good book about the heart and how I think in our Western
Coherent
model,
heart, yes.
we have kind of maybe a not very full understanding about what the heart is, and I think it's very true. But that tied into this idea of water and structured water and part of what the role of the heart is. And that's a big part of your work. You really seem to be a scientist, I think in the good way of that word, someone who's really looking into the deeper nature of things and from a very fresh mind and open mind. I've been fascinated by water for a long time. People like Victor Schauberger and even Dr. Thomas Cohen and a lot of these, I think, really pioneering people in water. And I think you're really taking all of that knowledge and making it very accessible and doable. And so maybe to start out, and I know this is always a huge question, but if you can tell the audience some about yourself, who you are, kind of your life story, and what got you really
Yeah.
fascinated in this idea of the science and the life behind water.
Well, I guess my interest in water started actually as a child, and where I live with my wife at the moment, I'm only 5 kilometres north of where I grew up as a child, and I'm still living on the same river that I grew up on, and swam in this river and fished in it and rafted in it. And not far from waterfalls where I spent a lot of time as a child, and I sort of had a connection with nature right from the start and with water. I got into the science of water, even though, by this time I'd already completed a Bachelor of Science and a Master of Science at university. But, I learned a lot from reading Schauberger's work, and particularly one essay he wrote where he said when they straightened out the Rhine and the Danube in Germany and other German rivers, that the river changed from its negative charge into positive charge. and it lost its insulation. He meant by that it lost its capacity to hold a negative charge, and it lost its magnetic levitation, and the river levels dropped by up to 10 metres. Now, that sort of fascinated me at the time, because he was talking about charge in water, whereas at university I was taught that, water was just neutral. Anyway, I decided to pursue this, and this led me to Professor Korokov, a Russian scientist. I met him in 2008 in the UK, and he led me to other scientists. I met with a number of water-structured scientists in Austria, in Vienna, in 2010. They said to me, Rob, if you can get still water to hold a negative charge for more than 60 hours, you've cracked the holy grail of water. The other thing they told me was, don't try and give instructions to water or try and tell water what to do, because water knows what to do. It has its own intelligence and consciousness. Anyway, I took that away, and in 2012 I worked out how to put a permanent negative charge into still water. And the reason for this is that the river that flows past my property, called the Mongala River, is a pristine river. And if you measure the charge in it using a voltmeter and a few other things, it's got a negative charge. And that negative charge increases when it's in flood or when it's turbulent. And when it's in low flow, like in a drought, it's got low negative charge, but it always has a negative charge. But when you take water out of a pristine river, in 60 hours, the charge turns to positive. Now, this is significant because every cell on this planet, whether it's a microbe or a plant or an animal or a human, operates at its fullest potential with a negative charge. So most organs in our body operate at their fullest potential with a negative 50 millivolt charge. And it's only your heart that operates between negative 75 and negative 110. And this is why your heart will never get cancer. So we can deduce from this that if you maintain the negative charge of every organ and system in your body, you'll probably never get a disease. Now, I learned a long time ago, perhaps when I was 33, and that's 44 years ago, that the medical system was always set up based on the concept of dealing with matter. And so the body was treated as a chemical system. So that allowed them to prescribe drugs. But the human body is actually an energy system. And that energy system determines the functionality of all organs and systems in your body, and particularly your heart. And that biological system determines the functionality of your chemical system. And the chemical system's got many roles, of course, like detoxing, fat metabolism, sugar metabolism. There's many chemical functions in your body that have to be performed. But if the biological system is not fully charged by the energy system, well, it's not going to work. So if you have a medical system set up that only feeds the chemical system or the matter in your body, that's the way they say, and that's the way that physics went. It never was this way back in the early 19th century. Where they were deeply into the energy system like ether and so forth. So physics moved it to more to a system based on matter, whereas everything happening in the universe is based on waves. So the human body is an energy system linked to all of these waves and the frequency, and that's what's driving our body. Now, the body is made up primarily of water. 70% of the body is water by volume, and 99.9% of the molecules in our body are water molecules. We're a water body. And after that, the biological system is important, like the microbes in your gut, and they cover our body. But the water is the most important, and it's through the water that we entrain frequency. So what I deal with is structured water. So structured water is water in its most pristine state. This is the water that our ancestors drank. You know, they lived by the banks of these flowing systems, and they knew water as being sacred, and, you know, it was often called holy water because of its healing capacities. Now, nearly everyone on this planet is drinking dead water because it's been put into tanks and reservoirs and long straight pipes, and it's now holding a positive charge. So every time you consume positive charge into your body, either through water or food, and that includes food that, 60 hours after harvest, the food has lost its negative charge, it turns to positive. So your body has to convert that positive charge back to negative charge. Now, Professor Korokov told me back in 2008 that most people on this planet are using 50% of their energy every day to convert positive charge, water and food, into negative charge. And this is the reason that we've had a massive increase in heart disease, cancer, nearly all the diseases, because people are just drinking dead water and eating dead food. So my research led me into that the fastest way to increase the negative charge in the body was to drink negative charge water. It will increase the negative charge of your cell tenfold compared with breathing or grounding or whatever. So in a nutshell, that's how I started, and this is where I ended up doing experimental work and finding out what the impact of negative charge water is in the human body and what the health values are.
Yeah, amazing. So kind of going back to square one, I know this is going to be a big question, but I think it's also important because I think, like a lot of things, we often just take things for granted and we don't think on a deeper level. But everyone knows what water is. We consume it, we bathe in it, we look at it, we touch it. Can you speak a bit more about what water is, where it comes from? I mean, like
Yeah.
many things, we just we assume that we know because we label it, we see it, but water is something that originates from somewhere, and I think that's actually a fundamental part of your work, is
Well,
actually
it is.
looking.
And water was in the universe before the Earth was formed. When Earth was formed, around about 4.5 billion years ago, at about 4 billion years, water was formed in an area between the crust and the mantle called the Moho zone. So this water, has increased over time and still is increasing today. But as this water moves through the rock fractures of the Earth, because the Earth is also an expanding entity. In fact, if you shrink the Earth by 40%, all the continents come back together again. So we're expanding, and this is fracturing the Earth. The water is coming out through these fractures, and that's why you have springs and waterfalls on the tops of mountains. It's coming up under pressure. So this early water formed eventually the oceans. The ocean increased, and eventually we had evaporation and rainfall. So rainfall is just a consequence of water being formed within the Earth. So the sea levels of the Earth have risen by about 120 metres over the last 11,000 years since the last ice age. So I can tell you, in Australia, where I am, Aboriginals, back before that time, because they've been here for 60,000 years, but back prior to the last ice age, they were fishing out on the continental shelf. You know, the water has risen, 120 metres. You know, prior to that time, Aboriginals just walked in a land bridge into Australia. And so most people don't understand that the water is the earth is dynamic in terms of expansion and the amount of water being produced. I mean, the amount of fresh water that's tied up in the crust of the earth is 3 times greater than that volume in the ocean. There's plenty of fresh water, and water is created in the earth the same way that oil and gas is. It's just a natural ongoing process. You know, we'll never deplete oil, we'll never deplete gas, and we'll never deplete water because it's continually increasing in terms of production. You know, as long as we don't use it beyond capacity, of course. But, water was around before any life on this earth was formed. So you had to have water for the first life. Now, tied up in water is a significant amount of intelligence, and it's water in our body that carries this intelligence. So water can receive, store, and analyse and transmit information. If the water in our body couldn't do that, we wouldn't have consciousness. We wouldn't be able to think. We wouldn't be able to have ideas, or we wouldn't be able to be innovative or creative. So water plays a massive role in cell function and in life, and it's been around for a long time.
Can you speak maybe on this idea of a more scientific way of looking at water, this idea of H2O or H3O? What is being referred to when it's
Yes,
referred to?
look, there's a lot of confusion around this. I mean, in part it comes from the work of Professor Gerard Pollock, who mainly worked at a cellular level, and he got these ideas from a guy called Linging. So Pollock spent most of his time looking at the water around a cell, and he found that it was in a gel form. And that's correct, it is. It's in a gel form, and that's why he calls it the 4th phase of water. But he often said that this water is different from bulk water. Well, bulk water is the water in the ocean and the water in all the river systems, and including the pristine water. Now, this never made sense to me. And so Pollock called the water around the cell EZ water, or easy water, because of its exclusion zone properties. So he basically said that the cell water was different from bulk water. But what I found was that water in its most pristine state was structured in and had exactly the same properties as our cell water. Now, I did a presentation in San Diego in America back in, I think, April 24, and Pollock was there, and at the end of my presentation, he stood up and he said, "You've just created EZ water." And I had to say to him, well, actually, the EZ water is exactly what's, is your bulk water, and it exists in nature, and it's in pristine streams. And this is where I think academics at times can, because they're singly focused on, one thing, they don't often see the big picture. Now, I came from a background as a military officer, and I was taught that planning started through a thinking process called deductive thinking. Is you start with the big picture and you work down to the minor detail. Now, when I was at university, I was taught the complete opposite. I was taught about inductive thinking, and I just knew I had to pass exams, of course, and to get through that process. But I knew when I got out of university, I would never ever apply the scientific procedure or indulge in any inductive thinking like they talked about. I go back to what made sense to me was deductive thinking. So academics, I think, get too narrowly focused on the area of their research and don't see the big picture. And so I started with the big picture with water, the water that's in nature that comes out of the ground, out of these pristine streams, and that flowing water, and we do have this in Australia. So the river I live on is pristine, and I went to visit these waters in New Zealand, pristine rivers there, up in the mountains, and I measured the voltage and so forth, and sure enough, it's got a negative charge. So, and it has all the properties. So I've recorded most of this in a PowerPoint presentation, which is available to anyone who wants to have a look at it. It runs into well over 200 slides, but it's my record of all my research and the proof of the properties of natural water, of what we call bulk water. And it's exactly the same as structured water around your cells. Although in your cell it's in a gel form, I'm talking about structured water in a liquid form, but essentially they are the same in terms of properties. So I know by drinking bulk structured water, that's water with a negative charge, and the definition of structured water is that it must have a negative charge and it must have crystalline structures. So I've measured my water and it does have beautiful crystal structures in it. Now, those crystal structures are actually formed not by atoms, but by the coalescing of electrons. And this is what gives the water its negative charge. It's the crystal structures and the density or the clustering of negative charge in there. And this gives it its properties. So the properties of structured water, whether it's a cell water in a gel form or in a liquid bulk form, is the same because the crystal actually defines the properties of the water.
One of the things that I think that you speak of that's very interesting is this idea of the magnetic levitation or the anti-gravity properties of water, and especially in pristine water environments like flowing streams. Can you speak to that idea? Because I think that's something quite
Yes.
revolutionary, but a very foreign concept to people.
When I read Schauberger's commentary about magnetic levitation in water, which is basically anti-gravity, we can say that. I did experiments. So I put blueberries and other sorts of berries into structured water and compared them over time with the same berries in destructured water, like just normal urban water that didn't have a negative charge. And I found over time, and sometimes it took months, if not years, but you'd find that the water that was destructured, the level in the container would drop. And in some cases, it would drop by 20 or 30%. So I concluded this was the water losing its magnetic levitation. So what I believe is that water that is structured with these crystalline structures, so if you can imagine a stack of magnets all facing each other with the negative charge facing the negative charge, you would have a repelling action, right? So if you've got a crystal structure in water and all these electrons, they're repelling each other, so in that you create a space, a significant increase in space where you can hold frequency and information. And that it is. So if you put frequency into structured water, it's held within the crystal structures of the water. So in what we might call, the empty space. So I think that when water doesn't have crystal structures, you have a collapse of the so the water goes from a hexagonal structure, as you would in cell water and bulk water that's got a negative charge. It goes into a pentagonal structure and it loses its density. So there's a loss. That's when there's a loss of magnetic levitation. So I've done these experiments using magnets. So you can do this yourself. So if you get two magnets and get a spacer you can put in between, so you put the negative charge up against one side of the spacer and a negative charge up against the other side, you'll find they'll create a massive negative charge in the spacer. Now, if you measure each of the components prior to putting them together, that is the two magnets and the spacer, and measure it, then you put them together as one component, there's a loss of weight by about 23%. 23% loss in weight. So that you've created an anti-gravity situation. And I find that this is about the amount of level that structured water will drop if it goes to destructured. So there seems to be a similarity between what you can create using magnets as to what happens in water. So water that's lost its magnetic levitation has basically lost its negative charge in crystal structures.
So can you speak? So this idea, if we think about a pristine water structure, which has this magnetized property, this anti-gravity property, structured, hexagonal, crystalline structure, negatively charged, that's the ideal state of water. What's happening when water begins to become manipulated, whether it's through the rerouting of streams, through pumping water through long tubes that goes into our water structures, through putting them in plastic bottles? What is kind of the breakdown from that ideal pristine state of water into the state that most of our water is being consumed?
Yeah, well, this is a critical point that everyone needs to understand, because most people grow up being receiving the messaging from the chemical industry and the material industry. So this is where, the system just broke down, in the early 1900s when we moved to Rockefeller medicine. And basically, the chemical industry took over because, the motivation between both those systems is making money. Now, you can make a lot of money by setting up a chemical processing system with massive infrastructure and convince people that they're producing from that pure water. And that is actual total rubbish. Once you put water through that system, it takes on a high positive charge. And they fill it up with chemicals like fluoridation and chloridation, and you've got all the other chemicals that are coming into that system from the catchments, the water catchment areas. You put it along straight pipes, and then they put it through RO systems, filter systems. Then those filters are just basically accumulating toxic matter. So if Einstein's equation is right, and no one seems to have proven it to be not right, that is E equals mc square. So if you increase the matter in a filter, you've also increased the energy. And I asked people, decades ago, well, have you ever measured what's in the filter? And 100% of the time they said no. So I said about measuring it with other scientists. And for example, we just measured heavy metals. We found that the heavy metals were 10 times greater in the filter than the water coming in. So if you apply Einstein's equation, E equals mc squared, then the energy from that is 10 times greater. That is, so if lead is 10 times greater in the filter, the energy, the toxic energy of lead coming into your cells is now 10 times greater. So these systems are literally poisoning people. And Jason, this is why I live on a property. I've got my own water. I've got my own bore water. I've got rainwater. And if I wanted to take water from the river, I could, but I don't. And I put my water through my devices and put a negative charge into it. And so I'm not drinking any polluted water. It's just water full of minerals and it's pristine. But most people on this planet don't have access to it. But my devices will actually convert urban water back to a negative charge, because the only thing that's relevant in water is the physics of water. The chemistry is totally irrelevant to your cells. Your cells are just hungry for negative charge. And that negative charge then drives your biological and your chemical system. So all those systems will work. And the human body is a perfectly designed detox system. I mean, this is why we have blood going through our liver 38 times a day and dividing the blood up to send certain toxins through your bowel and some out through your kidneys. There are microbes in your gut that are specially designed to disentangle chemicals, and the really toxic ones. And the same in your liver. Your liver's got enzymes to disentangle chemicals and so forth. And you've got a lymph system. You've got 600 to 800 nodes there that are designed to direct toxins out through your elimination system. So as long as your lymph system will work, as long as you've got enough collagen you'll get from the slow cooking of meat, and as long as you're moving, that is, the movement of muscle, and along with collagen, creates what's called a piezoelectric effect, which enhances the negative charge around your muscles, which enhances that lymphatic system. But when we entrain negative charge, we're always increasing the piezoelectric effect, particularly of our heart. And most people know the heart is not a pump. The heart just is one muscle that is braided like rope, and the heart's got 4 chambers, and it vortexes your blood. And the reason your blood can vortex around your body is that, the electrolytes you get from salt, are part of the electrical capacity of your blood, but also the piezoelectric effect you get from consuming structured water, sunlight, grounding on the earth, and training other frequencies of negative charge from nature, perhaps even listening to Mozart, 432 hertz. All this sort of thing increases this negative charge and this piezoelectric effect in your body. So this just gets back to what I mentioned earlier on, which is the body is an electrical system. And once you get your head around that, your diet and lifestyle will change dramatically, and particularly the nature of water that you drink.
So obviously, vortexing is something that's very prominent in your work, and I think a
Yeah.
lot of people wouldn't look at the heart as an organ that vortexes. People wouldn't think of water as vortexing, although interestingly, even in a lot of modern, physics or physics theory, you have these like unified vortex theories, that these quantum entanglements, and even the black holes, and potentially the universe itself is operating in some vortex. So it can even be seen that the vortex is some primordial state of the movement of the universe. Why is that act of vortexing so vital to kind of this life-giving energy of water?
The vortex, in nature, this is part of the wave energies, and undoubtedly, as a planet, we're vortexing along with the sun through the galaxy and through the universe. one thing that I think that Schauberger really got off track, having made this brilliant statement back in the early 1930s about the negative charge in water and water losing its insulation and magnetic levitation when they straightened out these rivers. He went heavily into the vortex to explain things, but my research shows that water in nature, in the ocean and pristine streams, gets its negative charge from the magnetism of the earth. And it's only when you take water out of its magnetic contact with the earth that it loses charge. I mean, it also, in a tank or reservoir, it can't vortex. But there is a big difference between magnetism and the vortexing in water, and it needs to be understood. So once water has a negative charge, it will send energy in both directions, and that's why your blood can go out to an end of a capillary and come back. And the same in a tree. The water can go up and down, and fish in a stream can use that energy that moves in both directions to move rapidly upstream, against the current. So once you've got a negative charge in water, it will activate a vortex action in the water. So in my device, it will send energy out in both directions to the input and the output end. It will vortex the water. Then the magnetism of the device puts the charge in, which is instantaneous, which creates the crystal structures, because it's instantaneous. It's the negative charge or electrons that form crystal structures. This occurs in nature, where whatever crystals are formed, they form from the coalescing of electrons. Again, this gets back to everything in the universe and everything around us is basically a wave function. And this wave function energy is what's been discarded really over the last 120 years in favour of material science and physics, and that's what's led us into urban water systems where the major function is chemical and physical, whereas in water, water in nature operates with energy and biology. So if you go to a pristine stream, the magnetism of the earth is putting a negative charge in, and it's getting also frequencies from the rest of the universe, and it's collecting biology along the way, including the DNA of probably of every plant and all the things that are in the water along the way. And, if we want to change the urban treatment systems, we just move to an energy system. We'd put a negative charge into it, and if it's wastewater, we just treat it with biology. Now, water knows what to do. Water has a massive intelligence. And one thing I learned from Korokov was, if you want to look to the highest level of consciousness, you'll find that it's in water, followed by microbes, followed by plants, and humans are at the bottom of the consciousness tree. We think we're at the top. But water has a massive intelligence capacity. And this is demonstrated in the work by Emoto, and there's a New Zealand woman, Veda Rossen, who does this work with, and she's written books about the intelligence of water by freezing water down to about 3 or 4 degrees, and by putting information in, the water would come back and reflect back. An example that would be, in one example she gives in her book, of putting the seed of a sunflower into the water, freezing it down to 3 or 4 degrees, and what the water reflected back to was the flower of the sunflower, the shape of the flower, the geometry of a sunflower. Now, this tells us that water has this capacity to analyse and to interpret. So the water, in this case, has analysed the DNA of the sunflower seed and reflected back the flower. Now, this happens in our body. So, on day one in your mum's womb, when that sperm met the egg, there was a flash of light. And perhaps that's when your spirit comes in. But all the information to form organs and systems, and by the way, your blood is formed before your heart, and then all other organs are formed after that. But the information is present, at that point, and it unfolds in a wave energy function. So, and there's lots of science around now to show that how the face would be formed through wave functions to give you eyes and a mouth and a nose and ears, and for example. But all that information is present and it'll unfold in a timely manner. So, life then proceeds in a human right through to 9 months, and assuming all goes well, you're born healthy. But it's all to do with the water. The water is the key. And, I often tell young women that probably the most important thing you need to do is to drink structured water before conception and during pregnancy and during breastfeeding, is to maintain the energy of your body. So, Jason, I think what we need to do to address this whole issue going, right through the way that water is used on this planet and the way we use chemistry and infrastructure, until people have an education about the physics of water, we're probably going nowhere. So all people can do is do something at an individual level. They can do something at the household level, to take water back to its natural state and back to the way that our ancestors, treated water, with respect and in a spiritual manner. We can't treat water as a commodity. It's not. It's more intelligent than humans. And we can't just treat it as an inert solute. It isn't that. It plays a massive role in our body. And until we get that knowledge, we won't get it from education. And I should remind people, there's a famous Nobel Prize winner, Richard Feynman, who once said, "Never confuse education with intelligence. You can have a PhD and still be an idiot."
That can be a good quote for the promo. You mentioned blood a few times. Can you speak more about the relationship of blood to water?
Yes. Blood is about 83% water, and the water that's in blood is in a plasma form. It doesn't have the same density as the water around a cell. So when you cut yourself, you'll bleed blood. But all the other water in your body, which could be somewhere between 40 to 50 litres of water, doesn't flood out of your body. It's when the surgeon sticks a knife into you, it's only blood that comes out. It's not all the other water in your body. It doesn't gush out. And that's because it's in this gel form. But blood, the blood in our body, obviously, it has to move through the heart and out through arteries and veins and out to capillaries. And the blood, once it gets to your lungs, it's going to make contact with oxygen in your lung, and the oxygen's going to donate some electrons to it, and it'll deliver those electrons from oxygen, because oxygen carries a negative charge. So we're designed to have this oxygen in our lungs. We don't actually breathe in oxygen, we breathe in negative charge. So the blood is delivering negative charge around your body as well as all the other nutrients that it has to service. So blood is a major carrier of electrical charge around our body, but the heart needs to be operating at a maximum negative charge. Now, just by way of background to this, we need to treat the heart as the most important organ in the body. It's an electromagnetic, it's probably more magnetic than other organs. And it has to be sustained in terms of its negative charge. And one of the fastest ways is to actually keep the heart in a state of calmness and tranquility. And this is what's missing in modern society, is we've lost the art of silence and having calm time and tranquility. When I try and get tranquility throughout the day, so I run a lot of Australian native plant nurseries on my property here, and I spend a lot of my time just going down to my plants and talking to plants, or taking my dogs for a walk, because I live in a 110-acre property and it's all Australian native plants. It's pristine. And I get plenty of early morning sunlight and so forth. I try and maximise the amount of calm time in my day and tranquility, because I know it's good for my heart. And as long as your heart's working, and along with your diet, because these days people have too much carbohydrate and they build up calcium, and that's what's clogging up their arteries. So blood flow is significantly affected by a loss of elasticity of the arteries and veins. And therefore, when that happens, those arteries and veins can't maintain the vortex of the blood properly. So there's then a loss of piezoelectricity along with that. And if you don't have enough boron in your diet, boron in your diet, that mineral is designed to pull calcium out of your blood and put it into your bones where it should be. And we know by drinking structured water, it will keep your arteries crystal clear. So blood needs to flow freely. That's what we call viscosity. And as long as we can maintain good viscosity and not have too much fat, and you can get cholesterol crystals in your blood, which come from gallstones. So what I do, and I've been doing this for 44 years since I was 33, is doing a gallbladder and liver cleanse. And I know people who do this significantly improve their cardiovascular system. So by keeping your liver and gallbladder clean or clear of stones, and having a diet which is mainly slow-cooked meat, so you get collagen every day, and I have a cupful of broth every day, and along with vegetables and fruit, that's basically all you need, just to get carbohydrates. That's not to say you're not going to have some bread, rice, pasta every now and again, but the human body requires a significant number of amino acids to make protein. Our body's got about 20,000 different types of protein. And these proteins are linked to our hormone system and, many other proteins that we need for metabolism. But the blood, I just know from experimental work that the blood is... If your blood is in good order and your arteries and veins have no loss of elasticity, and you've got good viscosity in your blood, and you've got high levels of oxygen or negative charge, we often talk about oxygen, but it's actually negative charge we're really talking about. The blood will function correctly and it will carry charge because that charge is critical to cell function. Cells will not operate properly without negative charge. And when that charge falls below about negative 25, you will get a disease. So I can say everyone with cancer and heart disease, they've hit basically flat battery, although it's not a battery, but basically that's what's happened. They've just lost the functionality of the cell to hold negative charge, which is what Schauberger said with the rivers. When they straightened out the rivers for shipping in Germany, it lost its negative charge. It lost its capacity for insulation or capacity to hold negative charge. And this is what's happening these days. And no doctor's going to tell you this because they don't work in the energy system of your body. But so all that's left is for people to learn about what the effect is of drinking structured water. We know from experiments that, and we've checked all the parameters, say for heart rate variability, and we found that after 20 minutes of drinking negative charge structured water, heart rate variability improved between 30 to 50% over about 70 parameters. We also know that by doing tests on blood, so blood cells will cluster, as you probably know. You can see this under a microscope. When they start clustering together and sticking together, you've got a problem with viscosity and blood viscosity. But when you drink structured water, again, within minutes, those red and white blood cells will separate out. So you'll get far better blood flow. And this is, it's an immediate effect of drinking negative charge structured water. And, what better reason to drink structured water?
I think it's fascinating because I've spent a lot of time learning, studying, working with a lot of indigenous healing systems, and they tend to put a big focus on this idea of purifying the blood, which is something that in Western medicine we tend not to think of much. Also, when you were speaking, I was reminded of this very beautiful thing. I spent time living in the Amazon with a group of people called the Shipibo people, and they have these beautiful like fabrics that they weave together, these geometric patterns. And they often say that in a way our health becomes in dysbiosis, unstructured, when these geometric patterns become distorted or not aligned or not in harmony. And part of their work is to literally or metaphorically weave these patterns back together. And all of those things, and even this idea of water, like there's this idea that even a glass of water can heal in the same way that a pill or some other medicine could heal. And I think a lot of that is this idea, obviously, of the intentionality behind the person giving the water, or the consciousness behind it. But also, from you speaking, it's this idea of the literal pristine, crystalline, negatively charged aspect of the water, that the water itself is a healing mechanism, which I just find very, very fascinating. Can you speak a bit more about the idea? So, I guess in a sense, like, how did you come to create these devices? Because it does seem that that's something that's quite unique. Like, what was that process that went on in your head? How did you foresee that? How did you come to actually create something that could be used and applied to a normal household?
Jason, look, I'm asked this question many times, and sometimes things happen for a whole range of reasons. And I do ask myself, why did I immerse myself into, the science of water, energy, and structure? Why did that happen? Well, probably because something was telling me or guiding me there. Now, I've also spent time, listening to people who have become inventive and creative in their life, and I found there was one common element. There was often an experience in their life, some life-changing experience. And a number of them, it was something like a near-death experience or something like that. And I've been through a near-death experience when I was 44 after a serious car accident. And I can tell you I emerged from that a changed person. And I started doing things. I started writing equations, even though, I'm no mathematician. But I was writing equations to convert colour into numbers so I could do analysis of soil and so forth, and convert everything to a number so I could do statistical analysis. But when I started reading Schauberger's work and other people's work, I started to see common elements in a way that other people weren't seeing. And I talked to the top water structure scientists globally and read their papers or books. And it could be that my approach was different, my deductive approach of looking at the big picture, but I had a capacity of pulling ideas together. And I do spend a lot of my research time reading and listening to the videos of others. But one person that did guide me quite a bit was a philosopher who I never met, which is Richard Feynman, who was not only a Nobel Prize winner in physics, but a great philosopher. I learned a long time ago that it's important to bring philosophy into science, so you've got context. Now, there are a couple of people who are very good at this. One was Walter Russell back in the early 1900s, who wrote a book called Universal One, who gave some great descriptions of the difference between electricity and magnetism. He described electricity will pull negative charge out and put positive charge in, and that's why it will kill you, whereas magnetism will put negative charge in and take positive charge out. So I learned a lot of things along the way, and I then just started to put the dots together. Because I realised, probably 30 years ago that no one was really looking at bulk water. You had to go back to Schauberger and others before then, but they were being distracted by as well, and, I guess science in the last 10 years, there's been a massive amount of information that's come out about wave energy and how electrons coalesce to make crystals and these things that I've been able to bring into my writings these days. But basically, I can say to anyone who wants to be an inventor, don't follow the scientific principle. Use deductive thinking. Spend plenty of time in nature to have time to think, some deep thinking. In fact, I came to the conclusion about there was magnetism that put the negative charge in the water by sitting down by the river close to my property and basically doing a Schauberger, because the story goes that Schauberger as a child would lie down on the mossy banks of rivers and imagine the water flowing through his body and picking up the intelligence of the water. And this is how he worked out that in any river system, it has energy moving in both directions, from the source to the ocean, from the ocean back to the source. And he worked a lot of things out that way. So I'd already studied magnetism at university. I'll tell you, everything I learnt there turned out to be useless. And if you lie down, I'd say if you lie down by the river and just put your mind to it, and just say to the water, how did you get your negative charge? And sometimes it's pretty simple. It just comes to you. And after that, I worked out, I knew a lot about sacred geometry, and that everything on this planet is based on geometry. The human body is based on the golden mean ratio, or phi, and Da Vinci, when he describes Valencia Man, and shows, and the whole Mona Lisa painting is based on the golden mean ratio. The overall height of the head and the width is the golden mean ratio. And there's golden mean ratio built into your fingers and the distance of your navel to the ground and to your overall height. So there's geometry built into everything. All living things have geometry. Plants have geometry. Animals have geometry. And shells and so forth have this geometry. So in designing the device, I knew I had to use magnetism, and I had to discard everything I was taught about magnetism, and I got information from a guy who wrote a book called Magnetism and Its Effect on Living Systems, a guy called Albert Davis. I got principles from there. Then building in sacred geometry, that is the distance between magnets in my inline devices. And the numbers of magnets, I worked this out in time, and it wasn't any scientific approach. It was just basically going back to including some information I picked up in China, of course, they're great in innovation and divining. So I picked up information there, but it was really a collection of information, bringing it together eventually. It took me 6 years to get the first prototype to work in my devices. But, to answer your question, I don't believe you can invent or be creative unless you're in a space of deep thinking and you have a connection with the universe and the earth in a way that is entirely different from the education system, which wants you to think about the material world and not the energy world.
What do you think is, because there's many different theories on, for example, how much water we should drink, but I think these are often limited because obviously it depends a lot on someone's diet, where they're living, how much fruit are they consuming. What do
Yes.
you think are just kind of very general ways of looking at, like, how much, especially if we're drinking negatively charged structured water versus consuming life water, water that's naturally found in fruits, although that's complicated too because a lot of our food supply has been tainted as well. But what do you think is a general balance of where people and how people should be consuming water into their body?
Yeah, well, this is a good question because the literature basically says that probably 90% of the population are dehydrated at any one time. And dehydration is probably linked to 60 diseases. Things like high blood pressure, you could even go to cancer, diabetes, and Alzheimer's particularly. And I think we've seen an increase in disease due to dehydration. People are more stressed, more distracted, and not understanding the importance of drinking water. So as a general principle, the amount of water you should drink, the way I calculate it, and I'm talking here in metric, if you take your weight in kilos and multiply it by 30, you'll work out the millilitres of water per day. So if you're 70 kilos, multiply it by 30, you get 2,100, so it's 2.1 litres per day. If you then divide that by 4, you'll get how much water you need to drink before breakfast, before lunch, before dinner, and before bed. So let's say 550 millilitres for someone of that weight. Now, the important thing about water is that we drink water prior to a meal to prepare the mucus lining through our mouth, down through the esophagus, to the stomach, the small and large intestine. So that mucus lining is critical to the processes of digesting food from the mouth right through to the large intestine. A common mistake that people make is drinking fluids while they've still got food in their stomach. So all food and water has to go to your stomach. Your stomach is highly acidic. Everything you drink and eat becomes highly acidic in your stomach. And the acid is there to break down food and to knock out pathogenic microbes like E. coli. And then it comes out of there, then your gallbladder is going to deliver some bile to metabolize fat into that food. Your pancreas is going to put some insulin in there to metabolize sugars plus pancreatic enzymes, and there's a range of gastric juices that come in from the stomach, for example, and all this has to arrive into your small intestine for digestion by the microbes. Now, if you drink water in the 1.5 hours to 2 hours after eating, you're going to dilute your stomach acid, and therefore you're going to upset the whole process. And this is why people have poor digestion, and they end up then with poor absorption, and then poor insulation and poor elimination. In fact, your detox system won't work, in this situation, and particularly if you're dehydrated. So understanding the role of water in your body, it's not only just drinking the structured water with the crystals to hold the frequencies that need to be delivered in your blood to service every cell in your body. And it's the amount of water and when you drink it is critical to these functions working. And most people get it wrong. And it's because most people just follow, their parents, and, unfortunately, Jason, we're not taught this stuff in school. And anyone graduating from high school or secondary school, you should be able to put an image of the body in front of them and get them to label every organ and system in their body and know what the function is of every one of them. And they should understand about the physics of water and the function of water in the body, because most of our body is water. But I think we're deliberately not told this because there's too much money to be made in the medical system and a massive amount of money made in big water, with the water infrastructure system. And this is why I spent a lot of my time, running workshops on water and health and well-being and growing the biological production of food without chemicals, and running energy workshops to just educate people about the way life was before Rockefeller took us in another direction. He he changed the education system by saying we don't need a nation of workers, we don't need a nation of thinkers, we need a nation of workers. And that just basically, so people are just taught a skill to become a slave into the system. The concept is that if you concentrate money and power at the top, you can control people, they won't ruin the earth. That's it. The idea is, and if you maintain, reduce population down, so that's the whole idea around it. And it's the same with water. It's unfortunate that governments support big water in polluting the water system. So most people are drinking water that's already highly polluted. It's taxing their detox system. And we now know from autopsies that a lot of people are dying and their body is just full of sludge from the lack of detoxing. The lymph systems are not working, the livers are not working. And it's just this, the dietary, medical, water systems that people, just accept as being the way it has to be. And it doesn't have to be that way. But I can't overemphasize the importance of drinking natural water. If you can get spring water that is mineralized, that hasn't been processed like through reverse osmosis, which will render it completely dead, and this water is, most bottled water has been through RO, and it's dead. So if you can access pristine water, like I can, because I own a property and I got my own groundwater bores, that is the best. But you can buy spring water. I mean, in Australia, there are people who sell, unprocessed, just pure spring water. And all you'll have to do is put a negative charge into it.
Yeah, it's interesting. I grew up in Virginia in the United States, and on my grandparents' land, they lived in nature, and there was these beautiful springs on it. And then one day the highway department came and purposely closed them up in the name of some common good. But I mean that used to be a very common practice, is people would go to the spring, and that's where they'd get their drinking water. Even in many cultures, you have this idea of holy water, of sacred wells or sacred springs. I mean, that seems like something we've really forgotten and really moved away from. Do you think there was something particularly special about these places, or it was just the fact that they were pristine? I mean, even today, you go to a country like Georgia, or maybe parts of France, where there are these like holy places, these places where people go for particular healing. Do you think there's something particularly special about those places, more so than the water, or it's just that they have maintained
Yes.
that pristine purity?
There are many places on the globe where water comes out of the ground with a negative charge, and this water is blue in colour. In fact, Jason, I can tell you, I have one bore on my property that produces this water, and it comes out blue, and the major mineral in it is magnesium bicarbonate. Magnesium bicarbonate has massive health benefits. And I know there are springs in places like California, in Mexico, they're in Croatia, in Lebanon, throughout Europe. You find these springs, this spring water that people in the past called sacred water or holy water, that have natural healing properties. And this is because of the negative charge and the crystal structure in the water. The magnesium bicarbonate is a massive benefit. I mean, clearly I drink this water on my property because I can. I've got access to it. But even that water that comes out with a negative charge, I still put it through my device to increase the negative charge on it. Of course, your body is just an antenna for negative charge. So, but there are these sacred waters, and we've lost this spiritual connection with water. Ancient cultures always had this connection, and it's the same in Australia. With Australian Aboriginals had this connection too. An Australian Aboriginal would say they are just part of the land. They don't see themselves as separate from the land. It's like us seeing a plant as just part of nature. They just saw themselves as part of that nature, no different from the plant or the water, and everything was respected. And I think we've lost this connection with water, and we need to go back and restore this respect and connection, or this spiritual connection with water, because it is the most healing thing on this planet. And our ancestors most of our ancestors drank this water. They knew it, intuitively knew what water to drink and what water not to drink. They didn't go and seek out swamp water. They sought spring water, and they just intuitively knew. But these days, people just take water out of the tap. Of course, the authority says this is pure water, and it's not. But people just don't know, and that's why people buy filters, because they believe that by filtering the water, they're making it pure. But unless you've got an understanding of physics, and particularly the first law of thermodynamics, which says you cannot destroy matter, you cannot destroy energy, you can only change it or transform it into another form or state. Well, this is what my device does. It just changes dead water back to living water. That's a transformation. And when water's in this living form, it takes on all the properties that are absent from dead water. And it's those properties that are involved in all the metabolic functions in your body. Of course, just the way we're designed. We're designed as a water system with biology. We need minerals, of course, because they're linked to a whole range of chemical functions in our body. So we need a good balance of minerals, which we can mainly get from salt, from a complex salt like Celtic salt or Himalayan salt. But the water is the key. It is the glue that holds our organs and systems together and enables the chemical system to work. That knowledge has been lost ever since the early 1900s. And we need to recover it. And what you and I are doing is just spreading the message. We're just trying to get information out so that people can take responsibility for themselves, because the human body is a self-regulating, self-healing system. You are the cure. What you do in terms of diet and lifestyle is what determines whether you're going to get to 99 and not end up in a nursing home. And I made that decision back at 33. So I've got to where I am at the moment at 77 without any medication. I have to have a medical every year because my driver's license requirements requires me to have a medical, because once you get to 75 where I live, in the state I live in, you've got to have a medical every year, because they think you're going to fall off your perch, by 75. And you know what? They can't find a thing wrong with me. And I got here by avoiding the medical system and just working out how I could maintain my health, for my wife and my family, just with water, food, nutrient-dense food, diversity of food, and lifestyle. And the lifestyle is where I live because, I just live in a pristine place. I can't see any neighbours. Everything's quiet. When my wife and I sit out on the deck of an afternoon, I can only hear frogs and birds. They're the only sounds. And it's not that I'm privileged in any way. I'm not. It's just that I made choices early in my life. I'm only around 33. I bought my property at 33. Best decision I ever made. And, and then just putting the effort into knowing about water and diet and lifestyle. And this is just part of the journey. And now I just spend my time, mentoring people or educating, through workshops on the way you can do this and stay healthy.
Beautiful. So can you speak about how these devices work? There seems to be two types. One is like an inline system that you attach to your home. The other is a more portable one that magnetizes, puts a negative charge through the vortexing. What is the functionality of that? Like, walk us through how does that actually work? If someone was to purchase that, what's going on when they're implementing that?
Well, the common element in all my devices is magnetism. I worked that out a long time ago from, as I said, that the only way that water on this planet was getting negative charge and sustaining it was while it was in full contact with the magnetism of the Earth. The vortex is critical because the vortex actually grounds, it brings the negative charge in the anti-clockwise spin, and in the clockwise spin it grounds it. So as long as water is going anti-clockwise, clockwise, in the vortex, it will entrain the negative charge and hold it in the water. And it's only when you take it out of that contact with magnetism and contact with and put it in a still state where it can't vortex, that it loses its negative charge and its crystal structures. So when I met Professor Korotkov back in 2008 and this bunch of scientists, structural water scientists in Vienna in 2010, the common thing they were saying to me was, Rob, if you can get water to hold a negative charge for more than 60 hours, and Korotkov had already proven that, for example, when you die, it takes 60 hours for your energy to leave your body. And Korotkov called that your soul leaving your body. And I asked him then, I said, well, what about water and fruit and veggies? What happens to them? He said, well, you go away and find out for yourself. And I did. 2 years later, I'd worked out that with a device we invented that I did this first experiment on my kitchen table. So my wife was there when it all happened. We took an apple off the tree, put it in this device, and we're measuring the energy leaving the apple, through an oscilloscope and onto a computer. So it was graphically, we could see the energy leaving. We could see the peaks and troughs in it. And at 60 hours, everything went zip. And Korotkov wrote a book on this called Light After Life. That is how your energy leaves your body, and at 60 hours, it's completed, that transformation. And as I said earlier, the first law of thermodynamics says that you can't destroy energy. You can only change it or transform it to another form or dimension or state. So I now know that, we know that that water and fruit and veggies will lose this negative charge. So I had to work out a way to put a permanent negative charge into the water. That took me a while to work that out, but basically the configuration of the magnets had to be entirely different from what everyone else was doing. And the numbers of magnets plus the spacings were critical. The other thing that was critical was something I learned from one of Professor Pollock's PhD students in his thesis, I found this connection between magnetism and copper. So the inside of the device. So in early prototypes, we found that if you use stainless steel, if the water had a negative charge, it would basically pull nickel and cadmium out of the stainless steel into the water. So it was only in copper that you didn't change the chemistry of the water in terms of what was in it. So structured water will not pull copper out of copper. And copper seems to have some magical relationship with magnetism. It's a marriage made in heaven. So it had to be copper on the inside. And copper is very conductive as well, so it works well with magnetism. So once I'd put all that together, I'd have to say the hardest part was working out the engineering of how to make all the components and put the components together and have an engineer who was willing to make the components and do it all in-house and assemble it in-house to protect my intellectual property. And so that was probably the hardest thing. But we did eventually get there, and I got an engineer. He's only 50 minutes drive from where I live, who was able to do this. So the computers actually generate the components, and then they're assembled under, my design instructions. And then when we get them from the engineer, we have to test everyone. So all my devices have certification, Australian industry certification. That is, the device will not adversely affect water quality. But we have to check them because one thing I found out on day one of making these devices is when you make them, the inline devices take on a positive and negative end like a magnet. So the water had to come in at the positive end and exit at the negative end. But we can make all size devices. So we've got a bottle top device. Now it only has one array of magnets in it, so it can use it in any direction. And we've got an under sink device and a shower device. And it only has one set of magnets too, so it makes it universal. You can insert it in line either way, and it'll still produce a negative charge. But with inline devices, we had to increase the amount of magnetism by putting other arrays of magnets, and by the time we got to 4-inch devices, we had to change that again to put magnets in a different configuration to create even greater negative charge because of the volumes of water that would be moving through large devices. So there are 3 basic designs in terms of the magnetism, but we have to test them every year as part of the certification we have. We're audited every year. We have to demonstrate the devices produce negative charge and do not degrade water. Of course, the people who do the certification can't measure the charge in the water. I had to work that out myself, and that's our proprietary knowledge on how to do that. But every device we sell is already certified to produce a negative charge, so you don't have to test that. And I tell most people, just experience what it does for your health to drink negative charge water. And probably the most common thing that comes back to us is that people report detoxing a lot better. They lose the fog, in their brain. They become better at decision making. They're clearer in thinking and so forth. And, I've had particularly men tell me, they'd been diagnosed with blockages in their arteries, and after 2 years, their arteries were crystal clear. Their cardiologist saying, "What are you doing? Everything's crystal clear now. So, what's important is just going through the experience of drinking the water and understanding the differences in health. And I can tell you, my wife and I can get through winter without colds and flus. I can't remember last time I had a flu. It must have been decades ago. And certainly prior to drinking the structured water. So there's lots of health benefits. And Jason, I do get a lot of questions of people wanting to know exactly how this works. Why does it work? How do I measure the charge in the water? But, at the end of the day, people buy benefits. And if you don't actually feel the benefit in doing something, well, you're probably not going to use it. And basically my business is word of mouth. Apart from my, the podcasts that I'm invited to do by other people, and my websites and papers I write, we don't do a lot of marketing. Although for anyone listening, I'm interested in manufacturing these devices somewhere else on the planet, whether it's in other continents like Europe and America, Africa, wherever. I'm open to that possibility, because we need these devices distributed globally, even if it's just at a domestic level with people looking after themselves. We will eventually get into the wastewater system, and I've already done extensive research in this area, and I know we can put wastewater through this device and produce drinkable water at the other end. And I've actually done this. I've actually put abattoir water through my device, and I've drunk this water. It didn't taste very nice because of all the nitrogen in it from urine, but it had no ill effect on me. So, and that is just by changing the physics of the water. And if I have to leave anyone with a message, forget about the chemistry of water. It's all about the physics.
So I would imagine if someone is listening to this, the best option they could do would be to find a springs somewhere that there's time-honored knowledge of this is very high quality drinking water, potentially running it through a device. What are kind of the downgrading of steps? I mean, what if someone only has access to city water? Would you still recommend them running it through like a carbon filter that they change regularly so that there's not accumulation, running it through a device, adding something like Celtic sea salt to bring more of the mineralization back to it, adding something like lemon or putting a plant in it? Like what are other things that you think could be beneficial, or you think simply city water and the device is sufficient?
Well, if people own a home, I've got a household device that will sit between the meter and the house. If you live in an urban area, if you live in a rural area where you got tanks and pumps, it sits between the pump and the house. And that's all you need. I advise people not to install filters because they just accumulate toxic energy, and there is literally no value in them. If you're going to have a filter, and I have seen some testing on this, the one filter that may be of some value is a carbon filter. The worst filter we've tested, is RO. It will convert negative charge into a high positive charge. In fact, all desalined water has high positive charge. And why they don't put that desalined water through my device, I'll never know, because they would know about this. And, you can fly on Emirates Airlines and drink desalined water that's got a high positive charge. And it would be a very easy thing to convert that to negative charge. just to support people's cells. So there's things that people can do. But generally, and look, I get emails every day, people asking me about filters. And I just refer them to my PowerPoint with a few other slides to show them, that, and people ask these questions. I don't blame them for it, because all the messaging and education is around the chemistry of water, and people believe that they've got to have a filter. You've got to filter out things, but you cannot make something disappear from water. You'd have to defy the first law of thermodynamics to make something disappear. Things don't disappear magically. And a filter is just a garbage bin for accumulating matter. And the filter doesn't change the energy of the chemical, whereas my device does. So my device will neutralise those chemicals so pristine flowing water is self-cleaning. I mean, I've just got a device that replicates what water does in nature, and it'll break open a chemical. So a chemical is just made up of bonds of elements. So fluoridation is made up of fluoride, silica and sodium. So you put it through my device, you end up with some fluoride in the water and some silica and some sodium. But you don't have fluoridation, which is a toxic chemical. Besides, fluoride doesn't exist in nature. What exists in nature is fluorine, not fluoride. So the river water that's close to my property has got fluorine in it, but it doesn't have fluoride. Besides, your teeth, need every mineral on this planet to work. It's not just, fluorine, and definitely not fluoride. So, look, people just need to start to have a look at the information around the energy and structure of water. And if they're prepared to go through my PowerPoint presentation, and Jason, I can send you the link to it if you want to pass it on to people, and they can download it. It's over 200 slides, but it's broken down into sections, or I can send PDFs of it, which of each section, but it does explain the quantum physics of water. So water has both macro and micro scale properties. And it's for that reason that we have life on this planet. And that's why you need to understand the properties of water, because they're critical to the way that cells work in your body. And it's just unfortunate that we have an education system that doesn't teach people this. I know why, because corporations wouldn't allow it. The lobbyists would put the squeeze on governments about this. So all I can do is just, really deal at an individual level with people. And, once people understand the basics, they understand this is just common sense. It really is. It's something that our ancient cultures understood. And they didn't have to understand the science. They just intuitively, spiritually understood that water was healing.
And once you run water through a device, it holds that negative charge indefinitely. Is that correct?
Yes. We were granted innovation patents in Australia for the reason that it would hold a permanent negative charge. And I had to hold water for 4 years before I could submit all these results to them. But one thing we do know is the charge increases over time. So I've got water sitting in a 1,000-litre container here that we processed in 2012, and the charge in that is negative 150 millivolts, which is the saturation point for negative charge in water. And that's where it is, and it accumulates. See, water actually can defy the second law of thermodynamics, which says that every living thing must proceed to the point of decay or death. And it will, and certainly as humans and all other living things, the only living thing that defies entropy is water. Now, you can kill water as our urban systems do, but you can bring it back to life. You can all you've got to do is restore the negative charge in the crystal structure, and that erases the memory of all the rubbish they put into it. So water has this intelligence. It can retain information, but it can also erase information. And it does it with the negative charge in the crystal structures. So it doesn't matter that water's been through an urban system. You can restore it back to its native state. But the one thing you can't do is literally destroy or eliminate what governments have put into water. In time, if you put a negative charge into water and put it into a container, like a glass container or a ceramic container with the top off, it will outgas all the chemicals they put into it. And this might take 24 hours or 48 hours, but you'll actually get a water that has gone back to an almost pure state. Now, in terms of minerals, you may want to add other minerals. I mean, I don't have to do this on my property because I'm already drinking mineralised water, and I put plenty of salt on my food, and we cook with lots of salt, like Himalayan and Celtic. But you may want to restore the mineral balance to get the electrolytes back into the water. I mean, desal water and RO water is completely devoid of minerals. So some restoration may be required there. But look, generally, I think the key to it is to source, as best you can, water that's in a fairly pristine state and start with that. That is the mineralised water. That's not possible for all people. That people, for example, people know that I've got this water on my property and I just give it to them. They can come in and pump out as much as they like and take 1,000 litres or whatever. They're welcome to it. And I get people who travel down from the capital of the state, New South Wales, down from Sydney, which is 3.5 hours, and they just bring 25-litre containers, get more water and drive back with it. So I think if you understand the importance of water, you'll probably go out of the way to get a high-quality water if you can.
Along those lines, because it's interesting, in the beginning you mentioned this idea of the problem of water as a commodity. Have you thought about how access to water, ideally, we can move to a better, more efficient system? I mean,
Yes.
you have ideas of public water, privatized water. Like, it always seems like that there's some problem in how water is divided or shared. And I think people have very idealistic ways. People have very commodified ways of looking at it. What is your thoughts around that?
Yes. Look, I've written a number of papers on this, and I think in the future we have to tap into what is an abundant amount of fresh water in the crust of this earth. As I said earlier on, it is potentially 3 times greater than the amount of water in the ocean. I believe that almost every village and town, and certainly most cities, could tap into this water and deliver to people through a device that puts a negative charge into the water. That's all you have to do, and deliver totally fresh water to people. The water that is most people are using is already contaminated because it's rainfall that's hit a catchment, it's gone into a dam or somewhere like that. It's full of chemicals. Of course, the amount of chemicals that are sprayed into the landscape these days through chemical farming, through firefighting, the PFAS chemicals from firefighting. The environment these days is full of chemicals. And this water is then being delivered through the urban treatment systems, and they just exacerbate the chemical toxicity and render that water dead. The long-term solution in every country is to access through drilling into the deep fractured water. So as part of my master's thesis, I actually developed techniques of mapping deep groundwater systems. And I still do this in Australia today. For farmers in rural areas, I still find for them fresh water by mapping and finding the fractured rock systems on their property, then drilling into it to get fresh water. And I know a lot of groundwater systems are just too shallow. They've gone into the shallow water system that can be contaminated. But if you go into the fractured rock, this water is flowing. It can be anywhere between 5 kilometres an hour up to 20 kilometres an hour. It's beautiful mineralised fresh water. And that's what I've done on my property. It's gone into the fractured rock and accessed this water. This is where we need to go in the future. But the understanding of that we have this fresh water is very limited. Most hydrologists seem to think that the only water we can access in the ground is from rainwater, which is, I've often asked these hydrologists, well, can you tell me where the water then came from in the first place? Because to get rainfall, you had to have water to start with. You had to get evaporation to get rainfall. But, they can't give you an answer. But there's very good science now going back well over 100 years to show that that's where the water's coming from. So this water was formed in our planet 4 billion years ago, in the mantle. And even rocks that come out of volcanoes, if you slice them open, they've got water molecules in them. We're talking about this rock coming from tens, if not hundreds of kilometres down in the planet. And it's got water molecules in them, in the rocks. So we'd have to have a massive shift in understanding and knowledge and the ability to drill to these depths, although we do have drilling rigs, because we already drill 2 kilometres down to get oil and gas. So the drilling rigs exist. There's no reason why we can't deploy these drilling rigs to get fresh water for every village, town and city.
And I think I saw also that you work with divining of water. Is that correct? And if so, can you speak a little bit about that?
Yes, I learned the technique of divining back in the mid-'80s by watching a guy who first sighted a bore on my property. So I bought the property in 82 and sometime before the mid-'80s, I got a drilling rig in and the driller sighted the bore by divining. So I watched him. Then I made myself some divining rods with just some fencing wire. I now use professional divining rods, but I just practiced and eventually I became very good at it. And in my, I'd already learned from my master's thesis how to map deep groundwater systems and out of that I was mapping soil and a whole range of other things, but I found that I could map the deep groundwater and I was using magnetics, gravity and radiometrics and combining them in a way that I could find the fractures, the rock fractures and the rock water. Now, in mapping, you can normally locate where these groundwater wells are going to be, or the bores, within about 30 to 50 metres because of the pixel sizes in the map. So it's only through divining, and I do teach these in some workshops I run on energy. So it was only through divining that I can actually put a peg in the ground so I can locate the intersecting point of fractures in the earth, so one on top of the other. And I then locate the drilling point. But also I use divining for working out the depths and volumes and the quality. Now, most other scientists, I think this is absolutely crazy pseudoscience stuff. But, the history of divining in China, it goes back 2,000 years. The whole concept of innovation is well documented. And it's a science that you'll understand it once you understand quantum physics, and that we are an energy system. The human body being mainly water, because we emit energy from our body, it's called our aura, we emit biophotons. So the water in the earth is also emitting these biophotons from light energy, or as light energy. And essentially, because we're an antenna, we've got 33 vertebrae in our spine, and our brain is potentially an antenna. And the divining rod is just an extension of our body antenna. So when I walk into a fracture, I'm asking the question, show me the edge of a fracture with water in it. Now, this information is received by the groundwater, and remembering that water can receive, store, analyse, transmit information, and there are many people who've proven this, including at least two Nobel Prize winners, explain to you why homeopathy works, because you don't have to have matter in water, you only need energy. So we're just tapping into the energy of the water in the earth. So when I get to those points with the divining rods, the rods will just cross over in front of me when I reach the edges. Then I just walk out, show me the other edge, and I walk back in and I just ask the question, tell me where the centre of the water flow is, and tells me that point. I walk up or down the fracture to find other intersecting points. So you'll only understand this if you understand how energy works in the universe and how everything is connected. There's an old Taoist saying, Chinese saying, and I've got this saying up in the room where I run my workshops, and it was written as a Chinese Taoist saying probably back in 400 or 500 years ago, and it says, everything is connected. And this is why innovation or divining works, because I'm just using the water of my body, and as long as I maintain the piezoelectricity of my body, I'll keep divining, for a long, long time. So it's all to do with the charge of your body and maintaining that energy flow, and you can tap into the energy of water. But I also use other indicators in the landscape, like outcropping rock. Tree limbs will bend into the energy of water. And I've seen trees bending right down and the limbs running along the ground. The energy is so strong in those fractures with the water. So I've learnt through observation and taking lots of photographs and doing this for the last 35 years to work out divining. And the unfortunate thing is, Jason, that there's not too many diviners left, and most of them are just grey-haired guys like me wandering around with bits of wire in their hand doing this sort of thing. But I'm training up some people in my company at the moment to do this, so I can pass on this knowledge.
Seems like a very important piece of knowledge to pass on. Robert, we're getting close to 2 hours, so I don't want to take up too much more of your time. I think I could pick your brain for another two easy.
Yeah, well,
Maybe as we
perhaps we
begin
can
to
do
wrap
this
up,
another time.
yeah. Kind of tying back to one of the things I heard you speak of when we started, and it's about this idea of kind of global warming and climate change. And I would imagine maybe I have an understanding of where you would come from, but just to speak to that, because I think a lot of the dialogue around that is coming from a place of lack, of scarcity, um,
Mm.
of a resistance to change, and also not focusing, kind of like you said, on the actual harm that we're doing, which is the actual polluting of things that are vital to us, the polluting of the land, polluting of the food that we put into our body, the water that we put into our body, which I think is a far greater detriment than what the earth can potentially handle and move through. Because as you said, we are part of the earth, and a much bigger organism than I think we can even understand. What do you think are important things to think about when people are thinking about water, about change, climate change, the toxicity of chemicals we're putting into water and food? Like what are your thoughts around those?
Yeah, well, these are big picture questions that are really important, and I think people have been misled by a whole range of agendas that have been run at the moment. The Earth is a dynamic system. I mean, well above the Earth, we have the ionosphere, then we have our atmosphere, and we've got the Earth. And those three systems are interacting all the time. And it's dynamic because we have sunspots, and the sun is dynamic and changing. We do know that climate goes through cycles. It has done ever since the Earth was formed. And there will continue to be ice ages and periods when the Earth is warm and we might be covered in rainforest. We know in desert areas, like in the Sahara, that was once rainforest, and underneath the Sahara there's massive underground stream systems, which Gaddafi and others tapped into to grow plants or have irrigation systems in the desert. I think it's important to understand that climate is changing all the time. That is just part of nature. I mentioned earlier on the sea levels have risen by 120 metres in the last 11,000 years, and they will continue to rise. Now, putting aside the fact that there are some nations who know how to manipulate climate and can do this, and I think this is going on all the time. And if they want to create rainfall somewhere or intense rainfall events, they probably know how to do it. However, we have to look at this dynamic nature and think about water and food and energy. Now, we could create free energy today because we know how to, but that technology has been suppressed. And a lot of people who have developed those technologies have suddenly been murdered or disappeared. There's a lot of corporate control over climate because they've got agendas. There's control over energy like oil and gas, and it's all based around the concept of scarcity. And that has no basis in fact or in science. The amount of oil produced will continue. You can pump oil wells dry and they'll fill up again. There's no such thing as oil running out in 10 or 20 or 30 years' time. Same with gas. And it's the same with water. So there are agendas out there around scarcity, and a whole climate thing, I think, is a setup to, put fear into people. And I think all these agendas run on fear. And if people don't have the knowledge or understanding to rationalise what's going on, they could end up being very depressed about all of this, about climate and or water scarcity or food scarcity or water scarcity. It doesn't have to be that way. And in terms of the future, the one thing I'd like to see is every nation go back to what I call sovereign wealth, where every nation has control of its own natural resources, and they're not owned by big corporations from other countries. So every country should be able to, export or manufacture from its own natural resources and build up a sovereign fund. If every country did that, no one would pay taxes because we'd have enough wealth sitting there. And we know at the end of the Second World War, under the Bretton Woods scheme, when the US dollar was linked to gold, there was literally no inflation until Nixon unhinged it and started printing money, to fund the war in Vietnam. If we could go back and have a sovereign fund where, perhaps the dollar or whatever the currency is linked to gold or silver or precious metals, whatever, it could even be pristine water. There's no reason why water couldn't be a currency. But unfortunately, money sort of rules, the paper money and the US dollar, and we'll never have equity globally, and we'll never close the gap between the rich and the poor until nations have control of their sovereign wealth and can use that wealth to fund education, science, and particularly innovation in industry so that people can prosper. I hope it happens, in my lifetime.
Well, Robert, this has been fascinating. Like I said, I think I could talk to you for another few hours easily. I think this has really been a master class in water and in your life's work. I also think you really embody the idea of a true scientist, a true philosopher, someone who is looking at things in a big picture. And I think more people are waking up to a lot of the things we've spoken of. I think even the COVID pandemic was, for many people, a big wake up call to begin to question, to look at things in a bigger light, to be more autonomous, to look after their health, the health of their family. So this is amazing. I think you're doing amazing work, and I think what you've created is something very, very special. I use it myself, and I really honor what you're doing. If people are interested in connecting with you or purchasing your products or learning more about you, what are the best ways to go about doing that?
Well, I've got a website which is www.meawater.com. They can contact me at rob, R-O-B, at meawater.com. If they want to do a deep dive into the physics in terms of the energy and structure of water, I can give them a link to my PowerPoint. I'm always happy to answer questions, but I third, that most people, do a deep dive into understanding the science. And the other thing that I do by engaging with people is other people offer to do experiments for me. In fact, the one on heart rate variability was done by a woman in Germany, and I've had others in Australia do blood analysis work, because they're interested in the science and they're just using my water to do those experiments. But anyone who's interested in engaging in the science, I'm hoping sometime in the future, and probably next year, that we'll be able to, through universities, or certainly in Australia, to be able to sponsor masters and PhDs into the energy and structure of water. Because at the moment, I'm the only scientist in Australia who works in this area. Now, that might sound amazing, but this is science that's been around for over 100 years. I mean, you can go back to the 1920s of Russian scientists working on the energy and structure of water. So there's a lot to learn, and I've got many papers, some of them accessed through the website, but I probably have another 50 papers that I just use to answer questions for people. There's always a lot of philosophy in my papers. They won't just get the pure technical stuff, but there's always a philosophical bent to it, in the way that Steiner used to, write back in the 1920s as well. But I certainly welcome people to contact me, but probably, Jason, it might be best on your site, just post my details, my contact details on my website.
Well, we'll do that, and I already have a link to that presentation. I believe your assistant Crystal sent it to me, and it's very good. So, thank you for all you're doing, Robert. I really appreciate you. I appreciate the time that you've shared with myself and my audience, and I just wish you to continue to do great work and have blessings in your life, and continue to share this beautiful knowledge that you have.
Oh, thank you, Jason, and thank you for this opportunity and the work that you're doing. And if you could send me this recording, I'll include it amongst my podcast as well to share it with other people.
Yeah.
And because it's another way of just getting the word out.
Yeah.
All right, everyone. That's it. I hope you enjoyed that conversation with Robert. I very much enjoyed sitting down and picking his brain. I think he's really one of the pioneers in this field, and I think water, it's something we're obviously all so familiar with, but we don't really often think about it on a deeper level. And it's such an important part of our lives, our health, our well-being, the well-being of the planet. So I hope you enjoyed that. As always, if you're able to support this podcast, that's a really big help. As always, Patreon is a really good website. You can sign up for as little as $1 a month. There's different tiers you can sign up for. Those tiers also give you different things back, things like early access to shows, bonus material, Q&As. Usually when guests come on for certain tiers of Patreon, they offer things back. So it's a really beautiful way to give and to receive back. As always, thank you so much to the people supporting that way. If you're able to help with the algorithms, that's always a super easy thing to do. It doesn't require much time or energy. If you're viewing this on YouTube or Rumble, hitting the subscribe button, turning on the notification bell, liking the videos, and if you're listening to this on Apple Podcast or Spotify, leaving a starred rating and a short review. And then finally, if you're interested in working with myself, you can check out my website at nicotianarustica.org. There'll be a link to that in the show notes. If you're interested in consultation work with plant medicine, with health protocols, integration sessions, and my main work working with plant medicine. So our schedule of upcoming retreats is out. We'll be having a number of remote workshops. We'll be in Ireland. We have a Portugal retreat coming up. We'll be in the Sacred Valley of Peru. So some really amazing opportunities to go deep into the world of plant medicine. So I think that's it. Thank you all very much for tuning in. I hope this finds you all well, and I will see you all on the next episode.